When my husband slapped me at our family gathering for refusing to sign over my tech startup, he thought public humiliation would break me. 3 years later, as he begged for a bailout in my Fortune 500 boardroom, he realized too late exactly who he had tried to destroy. Life has a way of revealing people's true colors in the most spectacular ways. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The summer breeze carried the scent of jasmine through the open French doors of our Westlake estate. I adjusted the collar of my azure silk dress, a designer piece that had cost more than my first car, as I watched guests arrive for the annual Hayes Foundation Charity Gala. The event was being hosted at my in-laws' sprawling property, a 7-acre monument to old Texas oil money that had been in my husband's family for generations. From my vantage point in the upstairs guest suite, I could see the various members of Dallas high society making their entrances. Women draped in couture, men in tailored tuxedos, all wearing the same practiced smiles that revealed nothing of substance. This was the world I had married into 8 years ago, a world of appearance over authenticity, status over substance. I was Emily Reynolds Hayes now, wife of David Hayes, golden son of the illustrious Hayes family, who had transformed their oil fortune into a diversified empire of investments and real estate. To the outside world, we were the perfect power couple. He with his classic good looks and Harvard MBA, me with my tech company that was quickly becoming one of the most innovative players in healthcare technology. The Prescott millions just arrived. David's voice startled me as he entered the room. Rebecca is wearing that hideous emerald necklace again. You'd think with their fortune she could find something that doesn't make her look like she's auditioning for a superhero movie. I smiled tightly, used to his casual cruelty. Over the years, I'd watched the charming man I'd married transform into someone who seemed to delight in finding weaknesses in others. The transformation had been so gradual that I hardly noticed, until it was complete. We should head down. Mother is already asking for you. David straightened his bow tie, eyeing me with a critical gaze. That dress looks better than I expected. The color works with the summer theme. 8 years ago, I would have beamed at such faint praise. Now, I recognized it for what it was, David's way of maintaining control, doling out just enough approval to keep me seeking more, never enough to let me feel secure. Neurotech just closed our Series C funding round, I said, adjusting my earrings. We've secured the capital for the nationwide hospital rollout. David's reflection in the mirror stiffened slightly. Let's not talk business tonight. This is a charity event, not a boardroom. The subtext was clear. My success was acceptable only when it didn't overshadow his. Neurotech Solutions, the company I had founded before our marriage, had grown from a small startup with an innovative neural interface for medical applications into a company valued at over $2 billion. Our technology allowed paralyzed patients to control prosthetics through neural impulses, and our newest innovation, an interface that could potentially restore communication for stroke victims, was what had attracted the massive investment round. David had initially laughed. When I started the company in our garage apartment, calling it my little science project. He had been working his way up at Hayes Investments then, earning his place in the family dynasty, and my entrepreneurial ambitions had seemed quaint to him. Of course, I replied smoothly, slipping on the diamond bracelet he had given me for our anniversary, a beautiful piece that sometimes felt more like a shackle than a gift. I was just sharing good news. We descended the grand staircase together, his hand resting possessively on the small of my back. The Hayes ballroom was transformed for the gala, crystal chandeliers casting a warm glow over arrangements of white, roses, and blue hydrangeas. The family's wealth was displayed with tasteful ostentation, priceless art on the walls, antique furniture positioned just so, staff circulating with champagne and crystal flutes. Patricia Hayes, my mother-in-law, broke away from a conversation with the mayor to approach us. At 64, She maintained the slim figure and perfect posture of someone who had been raised to believe that appearance was everything. Her silver hair was styled in an elegant bob, her navy gown custom-made to complement the Hayes sapphires around her neck. "Emily, darling," she air-kissed both my cheeks, her perfume expensive and subtle. "You look lovely. The Donovan Griffins were just asking about you. Apparently their daughter is interested in medical technology. Do be a dear and chat with them for a moment. David, your father needs you to help charm the Westons. They're still on the fence about the lakefront development." Just like that, we were separated, each assigned our role in the elaborate theater production that was Hayes family social politics. I found myself shuttled from conversation to conversation, playing the part of the gracious daughter-in-law, the successful but not threatening businesswoman, the perfect complement to the Hayes legacy. "Your neural interface technology sounds fascinating," Jessica Donovan Griffin said, her interest seeming genuine beneath the social veneer. "My daughter is studying biomedical engineering at MIT. Would you be open to her reaching out about internship opportunities?" "Absolutely," I replied with a genuine smile, handing her my business card. "We're always looking for bright young minds. Have her email me directly." As I spoke, I noticed Richard Hayes, my father-in-law, watching our interaction from across the room. Unlike Patricia's carefully cultivated warmth, Richard made little effort to hide his calculating nature. At 70, he retained the sharp eyes and sharper mind that had transformed Hayes Oil into Hayes Investments. He nodded slightly before turning his attention back to the state senator he was speaking with. Something about his gaze left me unsettled. It reminded me of the look he'd given me when David first introduced us, assessing, measuring, as if determining whether I was an asset or a liability to the Hayes name. As the evening progressed, I noticed David's brother Michael enter with his wife Jennifer. Unlike David, Michael had rejected the family business, choosing instead to become a history professor at Southern Methodist University. This choice had made him something of a black sheep, though the family maintained appearances by including him in important events. "Emily," Jennifer embraced me warmly. Unlike the air kisses exchanged with most guests, her hug was genuine. "I read about Neurotech's breakthrough in the Journal of Neuroscience. It's incredible what you're doing." "Thanks, Jen. It's been a whirlwind," I said, grateful for the authentic connection. "How's the manuscript coming along?" "Almost finished. The publisher's excited, though I doubt Women in the Shadows of the Civil War will make me rich." She laughed, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "But it matters, you know? Telling stories that haven't been told." I nodded, understanding completely. In the world of the Hayes family, worth was measured in dollars and influence. Jennifer and I had bonded over our shared belief that impact mattered more than optics. Our conversation was interrupted by the distinctive sound of a knife tapping against a crystal. Richard Hayes stood at the center of the ballroom, commanding attention without raising his voice. "Friends, family, esteemed guests, thank you for joining us for the 35th Annual Hayes Foundation Gala," he began, his voice carrying the confident tone of someone accustomed to being listened to. "Tonight, we celebrate not only the Foundation's work in bringing educational opportunities to underprivileged youth in Dallas, but also some exciting developments within the Hayes family." My attention sharpened. This wasn't part of the scheduled speeches. As many of you know, Hayes Investments has been exploring opportunities in the healthcare sector. Tonight, I'm pleased to announce that we're establishing a new division, Hayes Medical Technologies. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I felt a chill despite the warm evening. This initiative will be spearheaded by my son, David, who has shown remarkable insight into the potential for technological innovation in healthcare delivery. David stepped forward, joining his father with a practiced smile. I remained rooted in place, a sense of unease growing in my stomach. "Thanks, Dad," David said smoothly. "We at Hayes Investments have recognized the transformative potential of neural interface technology in healthcare. Our analysts project that this sector will grow exponentially in the coming decade. and we're positioning ourselves at the forefront of that revolution. He was describing my company's exact focus area, using language from the investor pitch I'd perfected over years. Throughout the ballroom, eyes flickered between David and me, curiosity and confusion evident on many faces. While I can't share all the details tonight, David continued, I can say that Hayes Medical Technologies will be making a significant announcement in the coming weeks that will establish us as leaders in this exciting field. The applause that followed felt distant, as if I were hearing it underwater. Jennifer squeezed my arm, her expression concerned. Emily? Did you know about this? I shook my head slightly, maintaining my composed smile through years of practice. Excuse me for a moment. I made my way across the ballroom, accepting congratulations from guests who assumed I must be part of this new venture. My mind was racing, connecting dots that had previously seemed unrelated. David's sudden interest in my quarterly reports, the unexpected questions about Neurotech's patent portfolio, his insistence on meeting my lead developers at our last company party. I found David in a small cluster of investors basking in their interest. Could I borrow my husband for just a moment? I asked, my voice pleasant despite the anger building inside me. I led him to a quiet alcove off the main ballroom, away from curious eyes and ears. Hayes Medical Technologies? Would you like to explain to me what exactly you're planning to announce in the coming weeks? David's expression shifted from annoyance to condescension. It's business, Emily. You shouldn't take it personally. My company is developing proprietary neural interface technology. You're announcing a division focused on the same thing. How exactly am I not supposed to take that personally? A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. He sighed, as if explaining something simple to a child. The Hayes name opens doors that Reynolds never could. We have the capital, the connections, the infrastructure to take this technology mainstream in ways you've only dreamed of. Neurotech just closed a $300 million funding round, I reminded him, keeping my voice low. We're hardly struggling in the garage anymore. And that's impressive, truly. His patronizing tone made my skin crawl. But be realistic. You're one company fighting for space in a competitive market. With Hayes behind this technology, we could dominate the sector. The implication was clear. So, what exactly are you suggesting? That I hand over Neurotech's intellectual property to become part of Hayes Medical Technologies? I'm suggesting a merger that would benefit everyone. Your technology under the Hayes umbrella. You'd still be involved, of course. He placed his hand on my arm, a gesture that once would have seemed affectionate but now felt possessive. Think bigger, Emily. This is an opportunity. I stepped back, breaking contact. Neurotech isn't for sale, certainly not to become a subdivision of your family's empire. Something dangerous flashed in David's eyes, a glimpse of the anger he usually kept carefully controlled in public. Don't be naive. This is happening with or without you. I'm offering you a graceful way to be part of it. Is that a threat? It's business, he repeated, smoothing his expression as a couple wandered nearby. We should discuss this at home. Tonight is about the foundation. He rejoined the party, sliding effortlessly back into his role as the charming heir to the Hayes fortune. I remained in the alcove for a moment, trying to steady my breathing and process what had just happened. The David I'd fallen in love with had been ambitious but idealistic, talking about using the Hayes resources to make a difference in the world. Somewhere along the way, he had become his father's son, seeing opportunities rather than people, assets rather than innovations that could change lives. When I returned to the ballroom, I noticed Richard Hayes watching me with that same calculating gaze. Now, however, I understood what I was seeing. Not assessment, but anticipation. Like a chess player who had just revealed his strategy and was waiting for his opponent to realize they were already in check. Jennifer found me near the bar, where I was sipping water and declining the bartender's offer of something stronger. I needed a clear head. "Are you okay?" she asked quietly. That announcement seemed targeted. "It was," I confirmed, keeping my voice low. "David wants Neurotech to become part of Hayes Medical Technologies. He just told me it's happening, with or without me." Jennifer's eyes widened. "Can they do that? Your parents? Your technology?" "They can't just take it," I said, though a seed of doubt had been planted. The Hayes family had resources and connections I could only imagine. But they could potentially develop competing technology, or try to squeeze us out of partnerships. "Michael mentioned something last week," Jennifer said hesitantly. "He overheard Richard talking about a healthcare acquisition that would keep things in the family. We thought maybe they were buying a hospital or something." The pieces were falling into place. This wasn't a sudden decision or opportunistic move. This was a calculated plan that had been in development for some time, all while I shared details about Neurotech's progress across the dinner table, naively believing my husband was showing interest in my work. "The quarterly board meeting is next week," I said, thinking aloud. "I need to alert our board members, make sure they understand what might be coming." "Do you think David would really try to hurt your company?" Jennifer asked, her expression troubled. I watched my husband across the room, laughing with potential investors, his hand casually resting on his father's shoulder, the picture of Hayes dynasty continuity. 8 years ago? No. Now? I shook my head slightly. I think he believes he's entitled to anything he wants, and right now, he wants Neurotech. As the gala continued around us, I felt as though I were seeing everything through new eyes. The eye, Hayes family wealth, which had once seemed impressive, now felt oppressive. The social connections, which David had always emphasized as crucial to success, now appeared as a web designed to trap and control. I made a mental note to call Charlotte first thing in the morning. My closest friend from MIT had become Neurotech's chief technology officer, and she needed to be prepared for whatever the Hayes family might try. Then I'd contact our legal team, review our patents and intellectual property protections, and shore up our relationships with key hospital partners. For the remainder of the evening, I played my role, smiling, conversing, the perfect Hayes wife. But inside, I was already preparing for battle. David may have thought he was making a smart business move, leveraging family connections to acquire valuable technology. What he didn't realize was that in threatening Neurotech, he had threatened the one thing I would never compromise on, the technology that was helping people reclaim their lives after devastating injuries. The work that gave my life meaning beyond the superficial world of Hayes family politics. As we drove home that night, the silence between us was heavy with unspoken conflict. David broke it only once, as we turned into our gated driveway. "I hope you'll reconsider my offer," he said, his tone businesslike. "The Hayes name could take your technology further than you can imagine." I looked at our Westlake mansion, the manicured grounds, the life of privilege I had become accustomed to, and for the first time, I saw it clearly for what it was: a beautiful cage. "My technology is changing lives, David. It's not a stepping stone for Hayes family ambitions." His knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "You've changed, Emily. You used to understand the importance of family legacy." I turned to look at him directly. "No, David. I've just finally understood yours." Little did I know that this conversation was only the opening move in a game that would become far more dangerous and personal than I could have imagined. The morning after the Hayes Foundation Gala, I woke before sunrise. David's side of the bed was empty, not unusual, as he often left early for his morning workout and breakfast meetings. Today, I was grateful for his absence. It gave me time to think clearly without maintaining the facade of normalcy. I slipped out of bed and made my way to my home office, a space I had designed as a sanctuary when we first bought the Westlake mansion. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the garden, while the bookshelves held equal parts business strategy volumes and neuroscience journals. On the walls hung framed photos of Neurotech milestones, our first successful prototype test, the ribbon cutting at our research facility, a group picture of our team celebrating FDA approval. I settled into my chair and opened my laptop, scanning through emails that had arrived overnight. One caught my attention immediately, from Jackson Moore, a venture capitalist who had been an early investor in Neurotech. Emily, unusual question. Has Neurotech been approached about acquisition recently? I was at the Petroleum Club for dinner last night and overheard some Hayes Investments executives discussing neural interface technology acquisitions as if they were a done deal. Thought you should know. Didn't sound like casual speculation. Let's catch up soon, Jackson. I stared at the screen, a cold feeling settling in my stomach. The Hayes announcement wasn't just talk. They were already moving forward with their plans, speaking about acquisitions as if decisions had been made. Moving to my desk phone, I dialed Charlotte's number. This had better be important, Em, my chief technology officer answered groggily. It's not even 6 a.m. David and Hayes Investments are making a play for Neurotech, I said without preamble. I need you to pull together the technical team this morning. We need to lock down everything. Development servers, prototype access, all of it. I heard rustling as Charlotte presumably sat up in bed. What exactly is happening? Her voice was fully alert now. I quickly explained the announcement at the gala, the conversation with David, and Jackson's email. They're planning something. Charlotte, I don't know if they're trying to force an acquisition or develop competing technology, but they're making moves. Jesus, Charlotte breathed. Do you think David would— he's your husband. 8 years ago, I would have said, absolutely not. Now? I glanced at a wedding photo on my bookshelf, David and I smiling on the lawn of the Hayes estate. I think business and family are inseparable from Hayes. And right now, Neurotech is the hottest property in neural interface technology. I'll call the team, Charlotte said firmly. Security audit across all systems. Immediate review of who has access to what. And I'll push the code lockdown we were planning for next month. No one gets into the development environment without dual authentication. Thank you. I felt a wave of gratitude for Charlotte, who had been with me since we shared a cramped dorm room at MIT. I'm heading to the office as soon as I can. Call our legal team too. We need to review all our IP protections, after hanging. Up, I quickly showered and dressed, choosing a structured navy suit that always made me feel armor-clad. As I was gathering my things, my phone buzzed with a text from David. Dad wants us both at dinner tonight. Steakhouse downtown, 7 p.m. Wear something nice. Important potential partners attending. The presumption that I would simply appear when summoned, despite what had transpired the night before, was so typically David that I almost laughed. I didn't respond, slipping the phone into my bag instead. As I headed downstairs, I was surprised to find Rosa, our housekeeper, already in the kitchen. She looked up from where she was preparing coffee, her expression concerned. Mrs. Hayes, I didn't expect you to get up so early. Mr. Hayes said you weren't feeling well and would be resting today. I froze, processing this information. Did he? That's strange because I feel fine. When did you speak with him? He called about 20 minutes ago, asked me to cancel your appointments and tell anyone who called that you were unwell. Rosa looked confused. He said you had a migraine coming on after the gala last night. The manipulation was so blatant it took my breath away. David was trying to keep me isolated while he made his moves. Rosa, I'm perfectly well. I'll be at the office today as planned. If David calls again, you can tell him I must be feeling better. I grabbed my car keys, seething as I headed for the garage. This wasn't just business maneuvering anymore. David was actively working to isolate me, to control the narrative. It was a tactic I'd seen Richard Hayes employ with business rivals. Limit their information, control their movements, shape how others perceive them. On the drive to Neurotech's headquarters, I called Jennifer. If anyone would have insight into what the Hayes family might be planning, it would be Michael's wife. Emily? Everything okay? Her voice was concerned. I rarely called this early. I'm not sure, I admitted. Has Michael mentioned anything else about Hayes Investments moving into healthcare technology? There was a pause. He did say something strange this morning. Richard called him, which never happens, asking if he still had contacts on the medical ethics review board at SMU. Something about wanting a favorable statement about neural interface technology. That doesn't make sense, I said, thinking aloud. Neurotech already has clearance from every relevant ethics board. Why would Hayes Investments need additional ethical reviews unless... I broke off as a realization hit me. Unless they're planning to challenge the ethical foundation of existing technology. Our technology. Michael refused, Jennifer assured me. He said whatever family business game was being played, he wanted no part of it. Thank him for me, I said, grateful for the ally, however peripheral. And Jen? You might want to warn Michael to be careful. I don't think Richard will take that refusal well. When I arrived at Neurotech's headquarters, a sleek glass building in Dallas's growing tech corridor, the parking lot was already filling, unusual for this early hour. Charlotte had mobilized the team. I found her in the main conference room, surrounded by our lead engineers, security specialists, and legal counsel. The whiteboard was covered with hastily drawn diagrams and lists. Emily, Charlotte greeted me, her expression grim. We've got a situation. Over the next hour, I learned the full extent of what we were facing. Overnight, our system had logged multiple failed login attempts using executive credentials, including mine. Someone had tried to access our development servers using passwords that had been changed weeks ago during routine security updates. The attempts came from IP addresses associated with Hayes Investments, our head of security explained, pointing to a log on his screen. Not very sophisticated, honestly. Almost like they expected the old passwords to still work. Or like someone had provided them with outdated information, I said quietly, thinking of the company email account that synced to my home computer, the one David occasionally used when his laptop was charging. Had he been gathering information all this time, watching for passwords, access points, vulnerabilities? Our legal counsel, Meredith Wilson, cleared her throat. There's more, Emily. We've received formal requests for technical documentation from 3 separate law firms this morning. They're citing potential interest from investment groups, but all 3 have represented Hayes Investments in various capacities. They're looking for weaknesses, Charlotte said, her expression hardening. Places where our patents might be vulnerable or where they could develop workarounds. I nodded, processing this information. What about our hospital partners? Any contact there? Meredith shuffled through her notes. Nothing official, but Dr. Landon from Memorial called to ask if Neurotech was being acquired. Apparently, he was approached by someone from Hayes Medical Technologies yesterday evening about continuing their neural interface program under new management. The conference room fell silent. This wasn't just aggressive business tactics. This was a coordinated attempt to destabilize Neurotech from multiple angles simultaneously. Technical, legal, and relational. They're moving faster than I expected, I admitted, leaning against the conference table. We need to respond on all fronts. We spent the next several hours developing a comprehensive defense strategy. Our technical team began a complete security overhaul. Legal started preparing responses to the information requests, providing minimal legally required information while protecting our core intellectual property. I personally called each of our major hospital partners to reassure them about Neurotech's stability and commitment to our projects. By midday, it felt like we had established a defensive perimeter, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were still missing something. The Hayes family operated like a corporate hydra, cut off one approach, and 2 more would emerge. My phone had been buzzing periodically throughout the morning, David calling and texting with increasing frequency. Where Are you? Rosa said you left the house. Why aren't you answering your phone? Dad's expecting us both at dinner tonight. This is important, Emily. I ignored them all, focusing instead on stabilizing Neurotech. Around 2 p.m., Charlotte knocked on my office door, her expression troubled. "We've got another problem," she said without preamble. "Marcus Stevens just called. He's requesting an emergency board meeting tomorrow morning." Marcus was our lead investor and board chair, and an old college friend of Richard Hayes. The connection had seemed beneficial when he first invested in Neurotech. Now it felt dangerous. "Did he say why?" I asked, though I suspected the answer. "To discuss a significant opportunity that has emerged for the company," Charlotte quoted, making air quotes. He wouldn't elaborate, but mentioned that all board members have received details via courier. A courtesy I hadn't been extended, despite being CEO and founder. The implication was clear. This move had been in the works long before the gala announcement. "Get me everything we have on board member voting rights and acquisition approval requirements," I told Charlotte, "and contact each board member personally. I want to know where they stand before tomorrow." She nodded, turning to leave before pausing at the door. "Emily? There's something else you should know. Parker Williams came to me privately this morning. He was approached 3 weeks ago with a job offer from Hayes Medical Technologies, a substantial salary increase to bring his neural interface expertise to their new division. Parker was our lead research scientist, the brilliant mind behind several of our key innovations." "What did he say?" I asked, my throat tight. "He turned them down immediately and came to warn us, but he thinks they've approached others on the team too." Charlotte's expression was solemn. "They're trying to hollow us out from the inside, Em." After Charlotte left, I sat at my desk, trying to process the escalating situation. In less than 24 hours, the life I had built was under siege from all sides. My company threatened, my marriage revealed as a facade, even my home no longer feeling safe. My phone buzzed again with a call from David. This time I answered. "Where have you been?" His voice was tight with barely controlled anger. "I've been trying to reach you all day." "At my company, dealing with multiple attempted security breaches from Hayes Investments' IP addresses," I replied coldly. "Would you know anything about that, David?" There was a brief pause. "I don't handle IT security. If someone at the company is looking into Neurotech systems, I'm sure they have legitimate business reasons." "Like stealing proprietary technology or finding weaknesses in our patents?" I challenged myself. "There's nothing legitimate about what's happening, and we both know it." "You're being paranoid," David said dismissively. "This is exactly why we need to bring Neurotech under the Hayes umbrella, for proper management and security. Your emotion is clouding your business judgment." The condescension in his tone made my blood boil. This was a tactic he had used throughout our marriage, framing any disagreement as evidence of my emotional instability or lack of business acumen. "I won't be at dinner tonight," I said firmly. "Neurotech is facing a coordinated attack on multiple fronts, and I need to be here with my team." "This isn't optional, Emily." David's voice hardened. "These are important potential partners that could determine the future of neural interface development in this market. Your absence would be noted and interpreted as a lack of seriousness by potential partners. You mean people who are helping Hayes Investments try to take over my company?" I asked. "I think I'll pass." "You're making a mistake," David warned. "Dad won't accept this kind of disrespect, not with what's at stake." "I'm not one of Richard's employees, David. I don't answer him." "No, but you are my wife," he said, his tone shifting to something more dangerous. "And part of this family. That comes with certain expectations. Expectations like standing by while you try to steal my life's work?" I asked quietly. There was a long pause. When David spoke again, his voice was eerily calm. "I'll tell Dad you're not feeling well. Take tonight to reconsider your position." "This is happening, Emily." The only question is whether you'll benefit from it or be collateral damage. He hung up before I could respond. I stared at the phone, a chill running through me. In all our years together, through countless disagreements and tense moments, I had never heard David speak to me with such cold determination. For the first time, I found myself wondering if I was truly safe in my own home. As evening fell, Charlotte persuaded me to leave the office, citing the need for rest before tomorrow's board meeting. "You need to be sharp," she insisted. "We've done everything we can for now. The security team is staying overnight to monitor the systems." I knew she was right, but the thought of returning to the Westlake house filled me with dread. Instead, I checked into a suite at the Rosewood Hotel downtown, using my personal credit card rather than the joint account I shared with David. It felt strange to be essentially hiding from my husband, but instinct told me to keep my location private. From the hotel, I spent hours on the phone with Neurotech board members, gauging their positions ahead of tomorrow's meeting. Some were clearly aligned with Marcus Stevens, speaking in vague terms about exciting opportunities and strategic partnerships. Others seemed genuinely concerned about the sudden pressure for major changes. It was nearly midnight when I received a text from an unknown number. "This is Michael Hayes. Jennifer gave me your number. We need to talk, not on the phone." My father just left an emergency family meeting. Whatever they're planning against Neurotech, it's accelerating. "Meet me at SMU Library tomorrow, 7 a.m., rare book room. Come alone." As I stared at the message, my phone began ringing again. David. I declined the call and watched as a voicemail notification appeared moments later. His message was brief and chilling. "I know you're not at the office anymore, Emily. You're not at any of your usual places either. This little disappearing act isn't helping your case with the board. Come home now, and we can discuss how to salvage this situation. Otherwise, you're only proving what Dad has been saying about your emotional stability and fitness to lead Neurotech through its next phase." I deleted the voicemail, turned off my phone, and stared out at the Dallas skyline from my hotel window. In less than 48 hours, my life had transformed into something unrecognizable. The man I had married, the family I had joined, the life I had built, all of it now revealed as far more fragile and conditional than I had ever realized. Tomorrow would bring a confrontation that would determine not just the future of Neurotech, but potentially my own safety. As I finally lay down to sleep, I realized that whatever happened next, there was no going back to the life I had known. The only way was forward, into uncertainty, but at least with my eyes finally open to the truth about the Hayes family, and about David. Dawn broke over Dallas with ominous storm clouds gathering on the horizon, a fitting backdrop for what I knew would be a pivotal day. I dressed carefully in a charcoal gray suit with a crimson blouse, professional, but with a subtle message of power and determination. My mother had always said, "Dress for the battle you expect to fight." Today, I was preparing for war, so. SMU campus was quiet at 6:45 a.m. as I made my way toward the library, keenly aware of my surroundings. Part of me feared this might be a trap, but my instincts told me Michael's warning was genuine. As the black sheep of the Hayes family, he had always maintained a certain distance from their machinations. The rare book room was tucked away on the library's third floor, a climate-controlled sanctuary of leather-bound volumes and hushed reverence. Michael was already there, examining a glass-encased first edition when I arrived. Unlike David's perpetually manicured appearance, Michael had the slightly rumpled look of an academic, a tweed jacket with elbow patches, wire-rimmed glasses, curly hair that refused to be tamed. "Emily," he said quietly, glancing around to ensure we were alone. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would." "Your message was concerning enough to warrant it," I replied, keeping my voice low. "What happened at this family meeting?" Michael gestured to a secluded corner with two armchairs partially hidden by bookshelves. Once seated, he leaned forward, his expression grave. "They're moving against Neurotech today. not just the board meeting you know about. Father has called. In every favor, leveraged every connection. The plan is comprehensive. He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture reminiscent of the boy he'd been when I first met the Hayes family. David's been working on this for months, Emily. Long before the gala announcement. Though I had suspected as much, the confirmation still felt like a physical blow. "Tell me everything," I said, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. Michael spoke rapidly, outlining what he had overheard. Richard had assembled a team of corporate raiders months ago when Neurotech's valuation began to skyrocket. They had been quietly analyzing our patents, identifying potential weaknesses, and approaching our key staff with offers. The emergency board meeting was just one piece of a larger strategy. They're filing regulatory challenges today, questioning the safety protocols of your neural interface technology, Michael explained. Not because they believe there are issues, but because the investigation alone will spook investors and hospital partners. That could delay our hospital implementation timeline by months, I said, my mind racing through the implications. Patients who need this technology would suffer while bureaucrats investigate baseless claims. Michael nodded grimly. They're counting on that pressure to force the board to accept their acquisition offer, which will conveniently resolve all regulatory concerns once Hayes Medical Technologies absorbs Neurotech. How convenient, I said bitterly. And David? What's his role in all this? Michael hesitated, discomfort evident in his expression. David's been the architect, Emily. Father provided the resources, but the strategy is David's. He presented the entire plan last night, including... He trailed off, seeming reluctant to continue. Including what, Michael? Including contingencies. If you prove difficult. His words, not mine. Michael wouldn't meet my eyes. They've compiled a file on you. Stress episodes during product launches, arguments with board members over strategy, even the medication you took briefly for anxiety after your parents' accident. The calculated cruelty of it took my breath away. David had weaponized intimate details of our married life, my moments of vulnerability, the private struggles I had trusted him with, and turned them into ammunition. They're prepared to question your mental stability publicly if necessary, Michael continued quietly, to suggest that the pressure of leading Neurotech has become too much for you. I sat in stunned silence, processing the depth of this betrayal. This wasn't just business. This was personal destruction, calculated, cold, and comprehensive. Why are you telling me this? I finally asked. Why risk your father's wrath? Michael looked up, his expression resolute. Because what they're doing is wrong. Neurotech's technology is helping people, real people with real needs. Jennifer's cousin is walking again because of your neural interfaces. This isn't just about business or family loyalty anymore. He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a USB drive. This contains copies of the documents I could access, the regulatory challenge drafts, the dossier they've compiled on you, emails between David and Father discussing strategy. It won't stop what's coming, but at least you won't walk in blind. I took the drive, its small weight feeling momentous in my palm. Thank you, Michael. This puts you at risk with your family. He gave a sad smile. Perhaps it's time to decide, what kind of family deserves loyalty? He glanced at his watch. I should go. Father expects me at his office at 8 to discuss my contribution to Hayes Medical Technologies. Apparently, they want a respected academic on their ethics board, and... Will you do it? I asked. What do you think? He stood, straightening his tweed jacket. Be careful today, Emily. They're not just after your company. They want to break you in the process. After Michael left, I remained in the quiet of the rare book room, the USB drive heavy in my hand. I had 20 minutes before I needed to leave for the board meeting. 20 minutes to decide how to use this information. I found an unoccupied computer terminal in a secluded corner of the library and plugged in the drive. The contents were exactly as Michael had described. detailed strategies for dismantling Neurotech's independence, regulatory challenges based on manufactured concerns, and most disturbingly, the personal dossier compiled to discredit me if necessary. Reading. Through David's clinical assessment of my exploitable vulnerabilities, felt like discovering a stranger had been living in my home. The man who had held me through my parents' funeral, who had witnessed my struggles with grief and anxiety, had been cataloging these moments not with compassion, but with calculation. One line in particular stood out in an email from David to his father. Emily's emotional attachment to Neurotech as her life's work makes her incapable of objective business decisions. When the time comes, this can be leveraged to position her as unstable and unsuited to leadership during a critical transition. I closed the files, removed the drive, and sat motionless for several moments. The betrayal cut deeper than I had imagined possible. This wasn't just about business anymore. This was about my life, my reputation, my very identity. By the time I arrived at Neurotech's headquarters, I had formulated a plan. It was risky, potentially destructive to relationships I had built over years, but it might be the only way to save what mattered most. Charlotte was waiting in my office, her expression tense. The board members are already gathering in the conference room. Marcus Stevens is with them. And Emily. She hesitated. David is here too. I nodded, having expected as much. Who else from Hayes Investments? Richard Hayes and their chief counsel, Gregory Wilson. Charlotte's eyes narrowed. They seem awfully confident for people who haven't even made an official offer yet. Because this meeting isn't about an offer, I said, quickly briefing her on what Michael had revealed. It's about forcing a crisis that only they can resolve. Charlotte's expression hardened as I spoke. Those manipulative bastards, what's the plan? I outlined my strategy rapidly, watching her eyes widen at certain points. It's aggressive, I acknowledged. Some board members won't forgive me, but I don't see another option if we want to keep Neurotech independent. I'm with you, Charlotte said without hesitation. Whatever it takes. The Neurotech boardroom fell silent as I entered. 10 people sat around the polished conference table, our 8 board members, plus David and Richard Hayes as invited guests. Marcus Stevens sat at the head of the table, a position usually reserved for me as CEO and founder. The message was clear. A coup was already in progress. Emily, Marcus greeted me with manufactured warmth. Thank you for joining us. We were just discussing some exciting developments with our guests from Hayes Investments. I took in the room with a measured gaze. Some board members looked uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact. Others appeared energized, already aligned with whatever Hayes was offering. David sat beside his father, his expression professionally neutral, though I caught the flicker of surprise at my composed appearance. Perhaps he had expected me to arrive emotional, disheveled after a night of panicked planning. Before we continue, I said calmly, placing my portfolio on the table, I'd like to address the reason we're really here. Marcus frowned slightly. We're here to discuss a potential strategic partnership that could accelerate Neurotech's growth and market position. No, I replied firmly. We're here because Hayes Investments has orchestrated a coordinated attack on Neurotech to force an acquisition on their terms. I opened my portfolio and removed several document copies, including, but not limited to, attempted system breaches from Hayes IP addresses, approaching our staff with recruitment offers, and preparing baseless regulatory challenges designed to damage our hospital partnerships. The room erupted in murmurs. Richard Hayes remained impassive, while David shifted slightly in his seat, the only indication that my direct approach had caught him off guard. These are serious allegations, Marcus said, his tone cautioning. And frankly, the kind of paranoid thinking that concerns me about Neurotech's current leadership. There it was, the first deployment of the unstable leadership narrative Michael had warned about. They're not allegations, Marcus. They're documented facts. I distributed copies of the key evidence from Michael's USB drive, watching the board. Members' expressions change as they reviewed the materials. Hayes Investments has been planning a hostile takeover for months, disguised as a friendly acquisition. Richard Hayes finally spoke, his deep voice carrying the authority of decades spent in boardrooms. This is a creative interpretation of standard business development activities, Mrs. Hayes. We've been exploring the neural interface market as potential investors, nothing more. Is that why you're filing regulatory challenges against Neurotech's technology this morning? I asked, looking directly at him. Challenges your own technical team knows are baseless, according to these internal emails. Several board members looked up sharply from the documents I'd provided. Jackson Moore, our most independent-minded investor, was already scowling as he read. Or perhaps you'd like to explain this dossier, I continued, turning to David, where you catalog my personal vulnerabilities to be exploited if I resist Hayes Investments' takeover. For the first time, David's composure slipped. Where did you get these documents? He demanded. That's your concern, not that you compiled them in the first place? I held his gaze steadily. Not that you plan to use private medical information to question my stability if I didn't surrender my company. Richard Hayes raised a hand, silencing David before he could respond. Whatever documents you've obtained were clearly taken out of context. Hayes Investments has simply been conducting thorough due diligence on a potential acquisition target. Due diligence doesn't include planning character. Assassination, Jackson Moore interjected, his voice sharp with anger. These emails clearly show intent to manipulate regulatory oversight to damage Neurotech if acquisition talks failed. The momentum in the room was shifting. Some board members looked genuinely disturbed by the evidence before them, while others seemed conflicted, glancing between me and the Hayes men. Marcus Stevens attempted to regain control of the meeting. While these concerns are noted, they don't change the fundamental reality. Hayes Investments is offering an opportunity that could secure Neurotech's future in an increasingly competitive market. What exactly is this offer? I asked, though I already knew it would be structured to leave me powerless. Richard Hayes leaned forward, seemingly unperturbed by the tension in the room. Hayes Medical Technologies is prepared to acquire Neurotech for a premium, 20% above your current valuation. All existing research would continue under the Hayes umbrella, with expanded resources and market access. And leadership? I asked directly. A transition period would be established, Richard replied smoothly. You would remain as a figurehead during integration, with David overseeing the operational merger. A figurehead, I repeated, letting the word hang in the air. So I would surrender control of the company I built, the technology my team developed, to become a public relations tool while my husband, who has no background in neural interface technology, makes the actual decisions. Emily. David's tone was patronizing, familiar from countless disagreements in our marriage. This isn't about control. It's about creating the strongest possible position for this technology in the market. The Hayes name brings credibility and connections that Neurotech needs. What Neurotech needs, I countered, is to remain focused on its mission, developing neural interface technology that transforms patients' lives, not maximizing returns for Hayes Investments. I turned to address the full board directly. What's being proposed today isn't a partnership. It's an absorption that would fundamentally alter what makes Neurotech innovative. The very independence that has allowed us to take risks, to prioritize patient outcomes over quarterly returns, would be lost. Marcus Stevens shook his head, his expression a mixture of disappointment and condescension. This is exactly the kind of emotional decision-making that concerns us, Emily. Business requires objectivity. Is it emotional to protect the company I've built from a predatory acquisition? I challenged myself. Or is it emotional to resort to threats and manipulation when you can't get what you want through legitimate means? Richard Hayes stood abruptly, his patience visibly wearing thin. This meeting is becoming counterproductive. Perhaps we should reconvene when cooler heads prevail. Actually, I said, I think it's time for a decision. I removed the final document from my portfolio and placed it on the table. This is a shareholder resolution I've prepared, affirming Neurotech's commitment to independence and explicitly rejecting acquisition offers from Hayes Investments or its subsidiaries for a minimum of 1 year. The room fell silent. Such a resolution would effectively block the Hayes takeover attempt and force them to abandon their current strategy. Marcus recovered first, his voice tight with anger. This is highly irregular. The board needs time to consider the Hayes offer properly. The board has seen evidence that this offer comes with coordinated attacks on Neurotech's stability, I replied. I'm calling for an immediate vote. You can't do that, David said, his composure cracking further. This requires proper consideration, legal review. Actually, she can, Charlotte interjected from her position near the door. As specified in Neurotech's bylaws, the CEO and founder can call for emergency protective action with an immediate board vote when faced with hostile action. I believe the evidence presented qualifies. The next 20 minutes were tense as board members reviewed both the Hayes offer and my proposed resolution. The room is divided into hushed conversations, with Richard and David moving from member to member, speaking in low, urgent tones. Throughout it all, I maintained my composure, though inside I was trembling with the magnitude of what was at stake. This wasn't just about Neurotech anymore. It was about standing against the kind of power that believed it could take whatever it wanted, destroy whatever stood in its way. Finally, Marcus called for the vote. The result was narrow but decisive. 5 votes for my independence resolution, 3 against. Neurotech would remain independent, and Hayes Investments' acquisition attempt was formally rejected. Richard Hayes's face remained impassive, but a muscle twitched in his jaw, the only sign of his fury. This is a mistake, he said quietly. One you'll have ample opportunity to regret. Perhaps, I replied evenly. But it's our mistake to make, this gala. Board meeting adjourned, with shell-shocked members filing out of the conference room. Charlotte stayed behind, positioned near the door like a sentry, clearly unwilling to leave me alone with the Hayes men. David remained seated, staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. You had no right, he finally said, his voice low. This was a family matter as much as a business one. That's where you're wrong, I replied. Neurotech isn't a family asset. It's an independent company with a mission that matters. This isn't over, Richard stated, gathering his documents. Not by a long shot. The Hayes family doesn't accept defeat, Emily. You'd do well to remember that. After they left, Charlotte approached, her expression a mixture of relief and concern. That went better than expected, but they're not going to stop. The regulatory challenges are probably already filed. I know, I said, suddenly feeling the weight of the morning's confrontation. But we've bought ourselves time and shown the board what they're really dealing with. My phone buzzed with a text from David. We need to talk. Family dinner at the USA estate tonight. 7 p.m. Don't make this more difficult than it needs to be. I showed Charlotte the message. He still thinks this is salvageable, that I'll fall in line if pressured enough. Are you going? She asked cautiously. I considered the question carefully. Part of me wanted to avoid the Hayes estate entirely, to retreat to the safety of my hotel suite and continue planning Neurotech's defense. But another part recognized that sooner or later, I would need to face David and his family on a personal level. The business battle was only one front in this war. Yes, I decided, but I'll have my lawyer draft divorce papers this afternoon. It's time to make my position clear on all fronts. Charlotte squeezed my shoulder supportively. I'll make sure the technical team keeps monitoring for any new attacks. And Emily? Be careful tonight. The Hayes family doesn't strike me as gracious losers. As I left Neurotech that evening to drive to the Hayes estate, storm clouds had gathered. In earnest, occasional lightning illuminating the darkening sky. The weather matches my mood, turbulent, charged with potential energy, bracing for the inevitable storm. The Hayes estate loomed ahead, its limestone facade lit dramatically against the darkening sky. As I passed through the wrought iron gates, I felt a sense of finality. Whatever happened tonight, I would not be returning to this place as a member of the Hayes family. The groundskeeper directed me not to the main house, but to the garden pavilion, a glass-enclosed structure overlooking the estate's manicured grounds, often used for family celebrations. As I approached, I could see figures inside, the warm lighting revealing not just David and his parents, but what appeared to be a full family gathering. I hesitated for a moment, suddenly aware that I was walking into unknown territory without allies. Then, straightening my shoulders, I proceeded forward. Whatever awaited me inside, I would face it with the same determination that had carried me through the board meeting. Little did I know that this family dinner would become the moment when all pretenses would fall away, revealing the true colors of the Hayes family and changing the course of my life forever. Thunder rumbled overhead as I approached the glass pavilion, raindrops beginning to patter against the transparent ceiling. The structure had always been Richard Hayes's pride, an architectural marvel of glass and steel that seemed to float above the estate's gardens. Tonight, it felt like a stage set for a carefully orchestrated performance. Through the glass walls, I could see nearly 20 people gathered inside, not just the immediate Hayes family, but cousins, longtime business associates, and family, friends. They were dressed formally, crystal glasses in hand, engaged in what appeared to be a celebration. A celebration on the day their takeover attempt had failed. The incongruity put me immediately on alert. Patricia Hayes spotted me first, her perfectly maintained smile faltering slightly before recovering. She glided toward the entrance, every inch the gracious hostess despite the tension vibrating in the air. "Emily, darling, we were beginning to worry," she said, air-kissing my cheeks as a uniformed server appeared with champagne. "Such dreadful weather for our little gathering." "I wasn't aware this would be more than immediate family," I replied, declining the offered champagne. The text mentioned dinner, not a party. Patricia's smile remained fixed. Richard thought it appropriate to include our closest circle, given the announcement. "Announcement?" I echoed, wariness increasing. "All in good time, dear. David is waiting for you by the fountain." The interior of the pavilion was divided into levels connected by short flights of marble steps. At the center of the lowest level, an ornate fountain featured a sculpture of Artemis, water cascading around her in a carefully choreographed dance. David stood beside it, deep in conversation with his father's oldest friend, Judge William Carter. Both men turned as I approached. Judge Carter's eyes narrowed slightly before he excused himself, leaving David and me in a small bubble of artificial privacy amid the gathering. "You came," David observed, his tone neutral, though his eyes were hard. "I wasn't sure you would, after this morning's theatrics." "I came to make my position clear," I replied evenly, though I didn't expect to be doing so in front of an audience. "The Hayes family has always understood the importance of witnesses for significant moments," he said cryptically. "I assume you've reconsidered your position about the acquisition?" "If that's why you invited me here, you've wasted both our time," I stated. "My position is unchanged. Neurotech is not for sale, to Hayes Investments or anyone else." David sighed, as if disappointed by a child's stubbornness. "Emily, be reasonable. The board vote this morning was a temporary setback, nothing more. Father has already spoken with 2 members who are reconsidering their positions." "Is that why Judge Carter is here?" I asked. "For more backroom dealing?" "He's a family friend attending a family gathering," David replied smoothly. "Though his position on the Medical Ethics Review Board might prove useful in the coming weeks." The implied threat wasn't subtle. The Hayes family was rallying their connections, preparing for a renewed assault on Neurotech. Before I could respond, a crystal chime rang through the pavilion, Richard Hayes calling for attention. Conversations quieted as he ascended to the highest level of the pavilion, commanding the room with practiced ease. Friends, family, valued associates, thank you for joining us on such short notice, Richard began, his voice carrying effortlessly through the space. While today brought an unexpected development in our business ventures, the Hayes family has always understood that setbacks are merely opportunities for more creative approaches. Polite laughter rippled through the gathering. I remained still, acutely aware of David's proximity and the strategic positioning of Hayes' allies throughout the room. Tonight, however, we're here to celebrate something else entirely, Richard continued. A new chapter for Hayes Investments that will reshape the landscape of medical technology for decades to come. My pulse quickened. What was he planning? As some of you know, we've been developing a new division focused on neural interface technology. What you may not know is that we've spent the past 6 months acquiring a controlling interest in Meridian Biotech. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Meridian was Neurotech's largest competitor, a well-established company with deeper pockets but less innovative technology. Effective tomorrow morning, Hayes Medical Technologies will merge with Meridian, creating the largest neural interface company in the market, Richard announced proudly. With Meridian's market presence and our resources, we'll be positioned to dominate this emerging field. The implication was clear. If they couldn't acquire Neurotech, they would crush it with overwhelming market force. Additionally, Richard T. continued, his gaze finding me in the crowd. We've secured exclusive partnerships with 3 of the 5 largest hospital networks in the country for neural interface implementation. My blood ran cold. Those were Neurotech's primary customers, partnerships we had spent years developing. This is a blatant attempt to strangle Neurotech out of existence, I said to David, keeping my voice low despite my growing anger. It's business, he replied dispassionately. If you'd accepted our offer, this wouldn't be necessary. Richard was still speaking, outlining ambitious plans for Hayes Meridian's expansion. The gathered crowd, many of them influential in medical technology, circles, nodded appreciatively, already aligning themselves with what they perceived as the winning side. Of course, Richard concluded, we recognize that consolidation can be difficult for smaller companies caught in the wake of progress, which is why we're prepared to extend one final opportunity. He gestured toward David, who straightened beside me. On cue, Patricia appeared with a leather portfolio, which she handed to her son with practiced grace. Emily, David addressed me, his voice raised slightly to ensure the room could hear. Despite this morning's misunderstanding, Hayes Investments remains willing to bring Neurotech into our family of companies. The offer remains on the table until midnight, 20% above market valuation, continuation of all research programs, and a senior advisory position for you during transition. The pavilion fell silent, all eyes turning to me. This wasn't just a business offer. It was a public ultimatum designed to leave me no graceful way to refuse. I appreciate the clarity, I replied, matching David's volume to ensure I too was heard. But Neurotech isn't for sale, not to Hayes Investments, not to anyone. Our technology helps people regain capabilities they've lost. That mission matters more than market domination. David's jaw tightened imperceptibly. This isn't about the mission, Emily. It's about survival. Hayes Meridian will control 60% of the neural interface market by next quarter. Neurotech won't last 6 months as an independent entity. We've overcome bigger challenges, I stated firmly. Not like this, David insisted, opening the portfolio to reveal official-looking documents. We've also secured exclusive rights to the Campbell neural mapping algorithm, the same algorithm Neurotech has been licensing for its core functionality. The calculated precision of the attack took my breath away. The Campbell algorithm was indeed central to our technology. Without it, we would need to develop an alternative from scratch, a process that could take years. You would deliberately cripple technology that's helping patients recover from paralysis and stroke. I asked, not bothering to hide my disgust. All because you couldn't force an acquisition? We're creating a stronger, more unified approach to neural interface technology, David countered smoothly. Patients will be better served by a coordinated effort than fragmented development. This is your final offer, he continued, extending the portfolio toward me. Sign the acquisition agreement now, and Neurotech becomes part of something greater. Refuse, and by this time next month, you'll have no company left to save. The room remained unnaturally silent, the assembled Hayes allies watching the drama unfold with barely concealed interest. This was the moment David and Richard had orchestrated. My public capitulation, or humiliation. May I? I asked, reaching for the portfolio. A flicker of triumph crossed David's face as he handed it to me. I took a moment to scan the document. Inside, a standard acquisition agreement, already bearing signatures from Richard and David Hayes as representatives of Hayes Investments. I closed the portfolio slowly, considering my next words carefully. The entirety of the Hayes inner circle was witnessing this exchange. Whatever I said would be repeated throughout Dallas business circles by morning. 8 years ago, I began, my voice steady. I married into the Hayes family believing I was joining a legacy of innovation and integrity. I was wrong. David's expression hardened. Emily, I've seen the true Hayes legacy now, I continued, cutting him off. Not building, but taking. Not innovating, but acquiring. Not competing fairly, but manipulating the playing field. I turned slightly to address the wider gathering. Neurotech's technology is helping people walk again, communicate again, and live independently again. That matters more than Hayes Investments' quarterly projections or market share. This emotional attachment to your company is precisely why you need experienced guidance. Richard interjected smoothly from his elevated position. Business requires objectivity, not sentimentality. There's nothing sentimental about integrity, I countered, or about refusing to surrender something meaningful to those who would destroy it. I held up the acquisition agreement. My answer is no. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. With deliberate care, I tore the document in half, the sound unnaturally loud in the silent pavilion. Then I tore it again, letting the pieces fall to the marble floor beside the fountain. Patricia Hayes gasped audibly. Several guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. Richard's expression remained impassive, though a muscle twitches in his jaw. David's reaction was the most dramatic transformation. The controlled businessman vanished, replaced by someone I barely recognized, face flushed with anger, eyes cold. With fury! You ungrateful bitch! He hissed, his voice low but intense. After everything this family has done for you, the connections, the opportunities, the status, none of it would have been possible without the Hayes name. Perhaps, I acknowledged calmly, but Neurotech succeeded because of the work we did, not the name on my marriage certificate. You think you can walk away from this? David's voice rose slightly. That you can humiliate the Hayes family and suffer no consequences? I think I've finally seen the Hayes family clearly, I replied, and I want no part of it, professionally or personally. I reached into my purse and withdrew an envelope, which I extended toward him. These are divorce papers. My attorney will contact yours tomorrow to begin proceedings. The collective intake of breath from the assembled guests was audible. Divorce was rare in Hayes circles, messy, public, and damaging to the carefully cultivated family image. David stared at the envelope, making no move to take it. When he finally looked up, the cold calculation in his eyes sent a chill through me. You would throw away everything we've built? He asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Our marriage, our position, our future, all for a company that won't survive the quarter? I'm preserving what matters, I replied steadily. My integrity, Neurotech's mission, my self-respect. Take the agreement, Emily. Richard's authoritative voice cut in. This is your final opportunity to resolve this situation favorably for all parties. I turned to face him directly. Favorable for the Hayes family, perhaps. Not for Neurotech, not for our patients, and certainly not for me. Don't be dramatic, Patricia interjected, moving to stand beside her husband. Every marriage has its difficulties. Running to divorce over a business disagreement is absurdly impulsive. This isn't about business, I said firmly. It's about recognizing that I married into a family that values control above all else, above innovation, above integrity, even above helping people who desperately need this technology. I placed the divorce papers on a nearby table since David still refused to take them. I'll be moving my things out of the house tomorrow. My attorney will coordinate the details. As I turned to leave, David grabbed my arm, his fingers digging painfully into my flesh. You're not walking away from this, he said, voice tight with barely controlled rage. Not after everything I've invested in you. Invested in me? I repeated, pulling my arm from his grasp. Is that how you've seen our marriage? As an investment? Everything is an investment, he snapped, his careful public persona crumbling completely. Time, money, connections, all of it was invested in building our position, our future. And you're willing to destroy it all, because you're too emotional to make rational business decisions. I think I've made a perfectly rational decision, I countered. I'm choosing not to surrender my life's work to people who would dismantle everything meaningful about it. David's face contorted with frustration. Take the agreement, Emily. Sign it now, and we can move past this momentary lapse in judgment. He retrieved the torn pieces from the floor, thrusting them toward me as if sheer force of will could make me comply. When I made no move to take them, his expression darkened further. This is your last chance, he warned. Sign the agreement, or I promise you'll regret what comes next. The blatant threat silenced the room. Even Richard looked momentarily uncomfortable with his son's loss of control in front of so many witnesses. I already regret the 8 years I spent believing you were someone you're not, I replied quietly. There will be no agreement, David. Not now, not ever. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. David's face transformed with rage, his control shattered completely. His hand rose and fell in one swift movement, the slap connecting with my cheek with enough force to snap my head to the side. The sound echoed through the pavilion like a gunshot. Pain bloomed across my face, sharp and immediate. I tasted blood where my lip had split against my teeth. For a moment, no one moved. The assembled Hayes family and friends frozen in tableau at this dramatic breach of decorum. I straightened slowly, touching my fingertips to my bleeding lip. The physical pain was secondary to the shocking realization that struck me. No one in the room, not David's parents, not the family friends, not a single person present, looked surprised. Violence wasn't an aberration in the Hayes family. It was simply one more tool of control, reserved for private moments but always available when other methods failed. Thank you, I said softly, meeting David's still furious gaze. For what? He snarled, clearly thrown by my calm response. For finally showing me exactly who you are, I replied. All of you. I turned slightly, including Richard and Patricia in my gaze. You've made what comes next so much easier. With that, I turned and walked toward the pavilion's exit, my footsteps echoing on the marble floor. No one moved to stop me. No one spoke. The only sounds were the patter of rain on the glass ceiling and the gentle splash of the fountain. I reached the door, Richard's voice stopped me. If you walk out that door, you're walking away from everything. The connections, the protection, all of it. You'll have nothing. I paused, my hand on the door handle, and looked back at the gathered Hayes dynasty. Wealthy, powerful, and utterly bankrupt of principles. No, Richard, I said clearly, ensuring every person present could hear. I'll have everything that matters. And you'll never see it coming. The cool night air hit my face like a second slap as I stepped outside, rain immediately soaking through my clothes. I walked steadily to my car, aware of watching eyes from the pavilion's illuminated interior. Only when I was safely inside with the doors locked did I allow myself a moment to process what had just happened. My hand trembled slightly as I touched my split lip again, the reality of David's violence finally penetrating the shock. For 8 years, I had been married to a man capable of striking me in front of witnesses when he couldn't get his way. What might he have done if we had been alone? As I started the car and drove through the estate's gates for what I knew would be the final time, a strange sense of clarity washed over me. The Hayes family had shown their true colors tonight. Not just David's violence, but the collective acceptance of it from everyone present. They had tried to break me, to force my compliance through intimidation, manipulation, and finally physical force. But in doing so, they had inadvertently severed the last threads of doubt or obligation I might have felt. The path ahead would be difficult. Hayes Meridian would indeed be a formidable competitor with their combined resources and connections. The loss of hospital partnerships and the Campbell algorithm would create significant challenges for Neurotech. But as I drove away from the Hayes estate, I wasn't thinking about stock valuations or market share. I was thinking about patients, people whose lives could be transformed by the technology we were developing. People who deserved better than to have that technology controlled by those who valued power above all else. Lightning flashed overhead, illuminating the road ahead as I made a decision. The Hayes family had just declared war, not knowing they had freed me to fight without restraint or reservation. They had resources, connections, and generations of entrenched power. I had something more valuable, nothing left to lose, and a clarity of purpose that came from seeing them for exactly what they were. The game had changed tonight. And though they didn't realize it yet, so had the rules. Rain pounded against my windshield as I drove away from the Hayes estate, the wipers struggling to keep pace with the downpour. Lightning periodically illuminated the road ahead, thunder following. Seconds later, the storm matched the tumult inside me. Shock, anger, and strangely, a sense of liberation fighting for dominance. My lip throbbed where David's hand had connected, the metallic taste of blood a tangible reminder of what had just occurred. 8 years of marriage had ended in violence and public humiliation, yet all I felt was a cold determination forming beneath the shock. I pulled over at a 24-hour pharmacy, ducking inside to purchase antiseptic, butterfly bandages, and concealer. The cashier's eyes widened slightly at my appearance. Designer dress, soaked hair, split lip, but she said nothing as she rang up my purchases. The small kindness of her discretion almost undid me. In the bathroom, I examined my face under harsh, fluorescent lights. The cut wasn't deep, but my cheek was already showing signs of bruising. I cleaned the wound carefully, applied a butterfly bandage, and used concealer to minimize the evidence of what had happened. The result wasn't perfect, but it would have to do. My phone had been buzzing incessantly since I left the Hayes estate. Texts and calls from David alternated between threats and attempts at reconciliation. "You're making a catastrophic mistake. Come home now and we can discuss this rationally. Do you understand what you've done? The entire Hayes network will close ranks against you by morning. Emily, please. You're upset. We both said things we didn't mean. Let's talk this through like adults. If you continue with this divorce, I will ensure you lose everything, Neurotech included." I silenced the phone and considered my options. I couldn't go home. The Westlake house technically belonged to both of us, but it was on land that had been in the Hayes family for generations. David would certainly be there waiting, likely with his parents, ready to continue the pressure campaign. A hotel would be obvious. The Hayes family had connections throughout Dallas luxury establishments. It would take one phone call to locate me. My office at Neurotech would be another obvious destination. I needed somewhere unexpected, somewhere the Hayes influence didn't reach. The solution came as I remembered a conversation from years ago. Jennifer, Michael's wife, had mentioned a family property, a lakeside cabin about 2 hours from Dallas that she had inherited from her grandmother. The Hayes family didn't even know it existed, as Jennifer had kept it separate from family assets. I started the car again and dialed Jennifer's number, hoping she would answer despite the late hour. "Emily?" Her voice was alert despite it being nearly midnight. "Michael just told me what happened at the estate. Are you okay?" "I need somewhere to stay," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Somewhere the Hayes family won't think to look." "The cabin," she replied immediately, understanding perfectly. "I'll text you the address and security code. It's stocked with basics, and no one in the family knows about it except Michael." "Thank you," I said, gratitude washing over me. "I need a few days to figure out my next steps." "Take whatever time you need," Jennifer assured me. "And Emily? Michael is livid about what happened. He's officially done with Richard and David." After ending the call, I drove to an ATM far from Hayes territory, withdrawing the maximum daily limit in cash. Then I stopped at a discount store, still open late, purchasing essentials, clothes, toiletries, and a prepaid phone. I paid cash for everything, aware that the Hayes family would likely be tracking my credit cards by morning. The drive to Jennifer's cabin took longer than expected due to the storm. By the time I arrived, it was after 2 a.m. The cabin sat on a wooded lot overlooking Lake Texoma, its silhouette barely visible in the darkness. I punched in the security code Jennifer had texted and stepped inside, immediately engaging the alarm system behind me. The cabin was rustic but comfortable, a far cry from the luxury I'd grown accustomed to in my years with David, but somehow more welcoming than the Westlake mansion had ever been. I peeled off my still damp clothes, showered in the small bathroom, and dressed in the simple clothes I'd purchased. Only then, in the safety and solitude of the cabin, did I allow myself to fully process what had happened. I sat at the small kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of tea, and let the events of the day replay in my mind. David's violence had been shocking, but, in retrospect, not entirely surprising. The signs had been there throughout our marriage: his need for control, his flashes of temper when challenged, his fundamental belief that everything and everyone in his life was a possession to be managed. What had surprised me was my own reaction. Instead of fear or devastation, I had felt a strange clarity in that moment, as if David's slap had knocked away the last of my illusions about him, about the Hayes family, about the life I had been living. I opened my laptop and began to type, documenting everything that had happened while it was fresh in my memory. The board meeting, Michael's warning, the family gathering, David's threats, and finally, his violence. I included names of everyone present, exact quotes as best I could remember them, and a detailed timeline of events. When I finished, I encrypted the document and sent copies to my personal email, to Charlotte, and to a secure cloud storage account David knew nothing about. Then I began a second document, this one a strategic plan for what came next. The Hayes family would be moving quickly to consolidate their advantage. David had revealed their strategy clearly. Hayes Meridian would lock up hospital partnerships, control the Campbell algorithm, and leverage their connections to isolate Neurotech from potential allies and customers. But they had miscalculated. In one crucial way, they believed I would play by their rules. They expected me to fight a conventional battle for market share and partnerships, a battle their resources and connections virtually guaranteed they would win. I needed to change the game entirely. By dawn, I had the outline of a plan that was audacious, risky, and entirely unexpected. It would require sacrifices and would fundamentally transform Neurotech, but it might be the only way to preserve what mattered most: the technology that was helping patients reclaim their lives. I slept for a few hours before being awakened by my new prepaid phone. Only Jennifer and Charlotte had the number. Emily. Charlotte's voice was tense. Are you safe? David's been here at the office looking for you, and he brought security guards from Hayes Investments. I sat up immediately, fully alert. What happened? He demanded access to your office, claiming spousal rights to company property, Charlotte explained. When I refused, he threatened to call the police, claiming concern for your mental state after you irrationally fled a family gathering and disappeared. My blood ran cold at the calculated precision of David's move. He was already implementing the unstable leadership narrative Michael had warned about. What did you do? I asked. Called his bluff, Charlotte replied with grim satisfaction. I told him that if he called the police, I would be obligated to show them the security footage of him attempting to force his way into the building, as well as photos of your injuries from last night. We don't have photos, I said, confused. He doesn't know that, Charlotte pointed out. The threat was enough to make him back off temporarily, but Emily, this is just the beginning. The board is already getting calls from Richard Hayes expressing grave concerns about your recent behavior and decision-making. Have you checked the system security? I asked, thinking of the previous intrusion attempts. Our team has been monitoring all night. Multiple sophisticated intrusion attempts, all routed through offshore servers to mask their origin. They're after our research database and patient trial results. I wasn't surprised. With those, Hayes Meridian could potentially replicate years of Neurotech's work. Implement Protocol Nightingale, I instructed, referring to an emergency data protection measure we had developed for worst-case scenarios. It would take our most sensitive data offline entirely, making it inaccessible even to most internal users. Already done, Charlotte confirmed. But there's more. The Campbell Institute called this morning. Hayes Meridian has indeed purchased exclusive rights to the algorithm, effective in 30 days when our current license expires. This was a critical blow, one I had anticipated but hoped to avoid. The Campbell neural mapping algorithm was foundational to our interface technology. Without it, we would need an alternative rapidly. What about our hospital partners? I asked, bracing for more bad news. 3 have already called, saying they've been approached by Hayes Meridian with exclusive partnership offers that include significant financial incentives, Charlotte reported. They're honoring existing contracts, but indicating they may not renew. I took a deep breath, processing this information. The Hayes family was moving even faster than I had anticipated, leveraging their considerable resources and connections to isolate Neurotech from key partners and essential technology. There's one more thing, Charlotte added, her tone changing. Jackson Moore called. He said Richard Hayes personally contacted him with a courtesy heads-up that you've been experiencing significant personal difficulties, culminating in irrational behavior at a family gathering. Hayes suggested that as a responsible investor, Jackson might want to consider his position regarding Neurotech's leadership. The character assassination had begun, exactly as Michael had warned. Richard was approaching our investors, planting seeds of doubt about my stability and fitness to lead. Combined with the business pressures from Hayes Meridian, it was a comprehensive strategy designed to force a leadership change at Neurotech that would make the company vulnerable to acquisition. What did Jackson say? I asked, though I could guess the answer. Jackson Moore was a principled investor, but he also had significant business interests that could be affected by Hayes's opposition. He said, and I quote, "Tell Emily that old money doesn't scare me, and neither do bullies in expensive suits. He's with us, but warned that others on the board might be more susceptible to Hayes' influence." I smiled for the first time since the previous night. Good. We'll need allies with backbone for what comes next. I outlined the strategy I had developed overnight. A radical departure from Neurotech's existing business model that would render many of the Hayes family's tactics ineffective. Charlotte was silent for several moments after I finished explaining. "That's bold," she finally said. It would mean walking away from millions in potential revenue. Yes, I acknowledged. But it would also mean Hayes Meridian can't strangle us by locking up hospital partnerships. They're fighting to control a market that we'll simply sidestep. The board will resist, Charlotte warned. This is a fundamental shift in our entire business approach. Some will, I agreed, but not all. Jackson will understand the strategy, and Dr. Lillian Chen has been advocating for broader access models from the beginning. With them as allies, we might convince enough others. We discussed implementation details for another hour before Charlotte had to return to managing the immediate crisis at Neurotech. After hanging up, I made a series of calls from my prepaid phone. First to my attorney to accelerate the divorce proceedings, then to a private security firm recommended by Jennifer, arranging for protection when I eventually returned to Dallas. Around midday, Jennifer called with an update from Michael. Richard has called an emergency family meeting for tonight. Michael's refusing to attend, which has created quite the stir. Apparently, there's significant concern about potential fallout, from witnesses to David's behavior. They're worried about their reputation, I translated, not about the violence itself. Exactly, Jennifer confirmed. Michael overheard Patricia talking about getting their narrative aligned before rumors spread. She was particularly concerned about Judge Carter, who apparently looked disturbingly judgmental after the incident. This was useful information. The Hayes family's greatest strength was their united front, the carefully maintained image of dignified wealth and power. David's public loss of control had created a crack in that facade, one I might be able to widen. Has David been looking for me? I asked. Aggressively, Jennifer replied. He's called everyone in your shared social circle, checked high-end hotels, even sent security to your parents' old house in Connecticut. Michael says he's becoming increasingly erratic as each hour passes without finding you. The thought of David's growing frustration gave me grim satisfaction. He had always prided himself on his control, over his emotions, over his business dealings, over me. My disappearance was a direct challenge to that control. What about my things at the house? I asked, thinking of personal items I couldn't afford to lose. My mother's jewelry, irreplaceable family photographs, important documents. Michael and I can help with that, Jennifer offered. We could retrieve essential items before David thinks to restrict access. I gratefully accepted, providing a list of priorities and the location of a hidden house key David didn't know about. After ending the call, I spent the afternoon refining my strategy for Neurotech, researching alternative neural mapping algorithms that could replace the Campbell technology, and preparing for the board meeting I would need to call upon my return. As evening approached, I stepped onto the cabin's porch, watching the sun set over the lake. The storm had passed, leaving behind clear skies and calm waters that belied the turbulence of the past 24 hours. My split lip still throbbed occasionally, a physical reminder of the decision point I had reached. I thought about the life I had built with David, the social position, the luxury, the carefully cultivated image of success. All of it had seemed so important once. Now, it felt like an elaborate cage I had mistaken for achievement. My phone buzzed with a text from Charlotte. Hayes Meridian just issued a press release announcing their formation and strategic vision, their positioning themselves as the compassionate future of neural interface technology, focused on patient accessibility rather than profit margins. I laughed out loud at the audacity. The Hayes family was attempting to co-opt Neurotech's patient-focused messaging while simultaneously working to destroy the company that had pioneered that approach. They're also hinting at a revolutionary pricing model to be announced next week, Charlotte added in a follow-up text, clearly aiming to undercut us with hospital systems. This confirmed my instinct that a conventional competitive response would be futile. Hayes Meridian could simply outspend and outdiscount Neurotech in a direct market confrontation. My alternative strategy wasn't just an option anymore. It was our only viable path forward. I texted back, Schedule an emergency board meeting for Monday morning. Secure location, no electronic devices, essential personnel only. As darkness fell over the lake, I felt a strange calm descend. In less than 48 hours, my marriage had imploded. My company had come under existential threat, and my physical safety had been compromised. Yet somehow, I felt more clear-headed and purposeful than I had in years. The Hayes family had shown their true colors last night, their willingness to use any tactic, cross any line, to maintain control and get what they wanted. They expected fear, capitulation, perhaps a negotiated surrender to their superior resources. What they couldn't anticipate was that in trying to break me, they had instead broken the last chains of convention and caution that had limited my thinking. The woman who had walked into the Hayes pavilion last night still cared about social position, board approval, market expectations, all the constraints that the powerful use to control the game. The woman who had walked out, face stinging, but, eyes clear, was playing a different game entirely. My phone buzzed one last time that evening with a message from Jennifer. Essential items secured. Michael found and disabled a tracking device in your laptop bag. Be careful. They're getting desperate. I smiled grimly at the confirmation of my suspicions. Of course, David would have placed tracking devices on my belongings, another method of control I had never detected during our marriage. Tomorrow, I would return to Dallas, to Neurotech, to the battle that was coming. But I would return transformed, no longer Emily Reynolds Hayes, dutiful wife of the Hayes heir, but simply Emily Reynolds, a woman with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. The Hayes family had resources, connections, and generations of entrenched power at their disposal. They were accustomed to getting their way through a combination of wealth, influence, and when necessary, ruthless tactics. What they didn't realize, what David hadn't understood when his hand connected with my face, was that some people become more dangerous, not less, when pushed to the breaking point. I touched my split lip gently, the pain a reminder and a promise. The Hayes family had declared war last night, confident in their ability to crush any opposition. They were about to discover exactly who they were fighting. I returned to Dallas 3 days later, transformed in ways that went beyond the fading bruise on my cheek. Jennifer and Michael had secured a temporary apartment for me in a building with robust security, a far cry from the Westlake mansion, but functional and, more importantly, unknown to the Hayes family. The security team swept it for devices. Twice, Michael explained as he handed me the keys. The lease is under a corporate name Jennifer's university uses for visiting professors. There's no paper trail connecting it to you. His expression darkened as he noticed my still healing lip. Emily, I want you to know, what David did, it's unforgivable. Father may be trying to close ranks, but Jennifer and I are firmly on your side. His support meant more than I could express. In the world of old Dallas money, family loyalty was paramount. Michael's willingness to stand against his father and brother represented a significant break from everything he had been raised to believe. Thank you, I said simply. But you should understand what that might cost you. Richard won't forgive this betrayal easily. Michael's smile was grim. After watching my brother strike his wife for refusing to surrender her company, I'd say betrayal isn't on my side. After he left, I set up my new command center. Multiple laptops, secure phones, and a physical whiteboard where I mapped out the moves and countermoves in the battle ahead. The Hayes family had significant advantages: resources, connections, and a newly acquired competitor that could potentially replicate Neurotech's technology. But they had weaknesses too. Their need to maintain the appearance of propriety, their assumption that I would play by conventional rules, their fundamental misunderstanding of what truly mattered about Neurotech's technology. Charlotte arrived that evening with updates from headquarters. The situation had deteriorated rapidly in my absence, just as I had anticipated. 2 more board members received calls from Richard Hayes, she reported, accepting the coffee I offered. He's painting you as emotionally unstable, claiming you've had episodes before that the family kept private out of concern for your dignity. I nodded, having expected this line of attack. And the hospital partnerships? 5 of our 8 major hospital partners have received exclusive offers from Hayes Meridian, Charlotte confirmed. 3 have already indicated they'll be switching once our contracts expire. The financial incentives they're offering are substantial. Under normal circumstances, this would be devastating news. But my days at Jennifer's cabin had given me time to develop an entirely different approach. What about the Parker-Williams alternative? I asked, referring to our lead scientist's ongoing work on a potential replacement for the Campbell algorithm. Charlotte brightened slightly. He thinks he's onto something. Not a direct replacement, but possibly a better approach altogether. It needs testing, though. At least 6 months of development before it could be implementation ready. We don't have 6 months, I acknowledged. The Campbell license expires in 30 days, and Hayes Meridian will be moving aggressively to capture market share during that window. I stood and approached the whiteboard where I'd outlined my strategy, which is why we're going to change the game entirely. For the next hour, I walked Charlotte through what I was calling the Open Neural Interface Initiative, a radical departure from Neurotech's original business model. Instead of developing proprietary technology licensed to hospitals at premium rates, we would make our core interface architecture open source, available to developers and medical researchers worldwide. Open source? Charlotte repeated, stunned. That's our most valuable intellectual property. Exactly, I agreed. And right now, Hayes Meridian is positioned to lock it up, control access, and prioritize profit over patient outcomes. By making the core architecture open, we accomplish several things simultaneously. I ticked them off on my fingers. 1, we render their exclusive hospital partnerships less valuable since any medical center will have access to the basic technology. 2, we create a development community that will rapidly advance the technology beyond what Hayes Meridian can achieve alone. 3, we position Neurotech as the ethical leader in neural interface development, focused on patient access rather than market control. Charlotte looked skeptical. And revenue? Our investors expect returns, Emily. We pivot to specialized applications and implementation services, I explained. The core architecture is open, but we maintain proprietary development on specialized interfaces for specific medical conditions. Hospitals will still need expertise to implement these systems effectively. That's where our revenue comes from. I could see Charlotte processing the implications, her expression gradually shifting, from doubt to cautious interest. It's high risk, she finally said. If it works, we can change the entire field. If it fails, we go down fighting for something meaningful, I finished. But think about it. What's Richard Hayes's playbook? Control access, limit. Competition, maximize profit. He literally cannot comprehend a strategy that prioritizes open access and collaborative development. It's outside his understanding of how business works. Charlotte's smile slowly widened. The board meeting on Monday is going to be interesting. That's one word for it, I agreed. Jackson Moore will support us, and Dr. Chen has been advocating for broader access models from the beginning. But the others? It's going to be a hard sell. Then we'd better prepare one hell of a presentation, Charlotte said, her energy returning. If we're going to completely reinvent our business model in response to the Hayes assault, we need data, projections, and a compelling vision. We worked through the night, refining the strategy and preparing for the inevitable resistance. By morning, we had a comprehensive presentation addressing every potential objection and outlining a clear path forward. As dawn broke, Charlotte paused in her work, looking at me thoughtfully. Emily, there's something I've been wondering. After everything that's happened, David's betrayal, the violence, the attempted corporate takeover, you seem so focused. Most people would be falling apart. I considered this as I poured another cup of coffee. The past week had indeed brought personal and professional devastation that might have once broken me. Yet instead of despair, I felt a clarifying sense of purpose. I think, I said slowly, that I've spent years trying to belong in a world that was never really mine. The Hayes family, their social circle, their way of doing business. I was always trying to prove my worth in their terms. I touched my healing lip unconsciously. When David slapped me, something shifted. I suddenly saw with perfect clarity that their approval was worthless, their values corrupt. Why should I measure success by standards set by people who would destroy something beneficial to protect their own power? So, what are your standards now? Charlotte asked. Impact, I replied simply. Neurotech's technology helps people recover capabilities they've lost. That matters more than market dominance or quarterly projections or the approval of Dallas high society. Charlotte nodded, understanding dawning in her eyes. That's why you're willing to go open source. You're prioritizing the technology's impact over traditional business metrics. Exactly. The Hayes family sees Neurotech as an asset to be acquired and exploited. I see it as an innovation that should be accessible to everyone who needs it. I smiled grimly. And interestingly enough, that perspective gives us strategic options Richard Hayes would never consider. My phone buzzed with a text from my attorney. Divorce papers served to D. Hayes this morning. Security footage from Hayes' estate requested as part of filing. Spousal abuse allegations formally documented. That was the personal front of this war, equally important to the business battle we were preparing for. David needed to understand that his actions had consequences, that violence would no longer be hidden behind a veil of family power and social position. Monday's board meeting is just the beginning, I told Charlotte, setting down my phone. If we're successful, we'll fundamentally change neural interface technology development. If we fail, I shrugged, the Hayes family will control the technology and likely restrict access to those who can pay premium prices. Then we'd better not fail, Charlotte said firmly. As she left to continue preparations at Neurotech headquarters, I stood at the window of my temporary apartment, looking out at the Dallas skyline. Somewhere out there, the Hayes family was plotting their next moves, confident in their ability to crush any opposition through superior resources and ruthless tactics. They still didn't understand what they were truly fighting against. Not a business competitor, but a fundamental challenge to their entire approach to power and control. By Monday, they would begin to realize that the game had changed irrevocably, and it had changed because they had shown me exactly who they were that night in the glass pavilion, when David's hand had struck my face, and no one had moved to stop. Him. In trying to break me, they had instead broken free the woman I was always meant to be. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows of my corner office at Neurotech's headquarters, casting warm patterns across the conference table, where our leadership team had gathered. The atmosphere was celebratory yet focused as we reviewed the quarterly results and the upcoming milestone that had brought us together. 5 years, Charlotte mused, looking at the digital display showing our global implementation map. 5 years since that night at the Hayes estate. Sometimes it feels like another lifetime. The others nodded in agreement. Most of them had been with Neurotech through the darkest days of the Hayes Meridian assault and the risky transition to our new model. They had witnessed firsthand the transformation, not just of our company, but of an entire industry. And tomorrow, we hit 1 million active neural interfaces worldwide, Dr. Parker Williams added, pride evident in his voice. Our lead scientist had become a respected figure in the medical technology community, his alternative to the Campbell algorithm now the global standard for neural mapping. When we made that first pivot, I never imagined we'd reach this scale, in just 5 years. I smiled, remembering the board meeting where we had announced our radical strategy shift. The skepticism had been palpable, the risks enormous. Yet here we were, celebrating a milestone that would have been impossible under the old proprietary model. The distribution is what matters most, I said, gesturing to the map. Not just the number, but where those interfaces are being used. The visualization highlighted neural interface implementations across 6 continents, with particularly strong concentrations in regions that would have been considered unprofitable under the Hayes Meridian premium pricing model. Rural hospitals, developing nations, community clinics, all now able to offer life-changing neural interface therapy to patients who would have been excluded under the old paradigm. As the meeting concluded and the team dispersed, I remained at the conference table, taking a moment to appreciate the journey that had brought us here. The betrayal and violence that had marked that pivotal night had launched a transformation far beyond anything I could have anticipated. My reflective moment was interrupted by Amara, my assistant. "Ms. Reynolds, your 3 o'clock is here, and Dr. Patel called. She's confirmed for the panel at the Medical Innovation Summit next week." "Thank you, Amara. Please show them in." My appointment was with Eliza Chen, a journalist working on a comprehensive feature about the revolution in medical technology accessibility. She had been following the neural interface field since before the Hayes Meridian confrontation and had witnessed the dramatic shift in how these technologies were developed and distributed. "Thank you for making time, Ms. Reynolds," Eliza said as she settled into a chair opposite me. "I know you rarely give in-depth interviews." "Your piece focuses on patient impact rather than business dynamics," I replied. "That makes it worth prioritizing." For the next hour, we discussed the evolution of neural interface technology and the broader implications of open collaborative development models in medical technology. Eliza was particularly interested in the contrast between the traditional corporate approach and Neurotech's open architecture strategy. The Hayes Meridian model would have reached perhaps 20% of current patients, I explained. Their premium pricing and controlled development were designed to maximize revenue per unit, not total patient impact. "And the financial results for Neurotech?" she asked. "Many analysts predicted disaster when you abandoned the proprietary model." I gestured to a framed article on my wall, our most recent annual report showing Neurotech's valuation at 3 times what it had been under the old model. "It turns out that enabling an ecosystem creates more value than controlling a market. Our implementation services, specialized applications, and training programs generate sustainable revenue, while the core technology continues to evolve through collaborative development." As the interview progressed, Eliza asked the question I had anticipated from the beginning. "Your ex-husband David Hayes has recently returned to Dallas after years abroad. Has there been any contact between you since the divorce?" "No," I answered honestly. "Our paths no longer intersect, professionally or personally." What I didn't share was the information that had reached me through Michael, that David had returned to Dallas diminished in both fortune and influence. After Hayes Meridian's collapse, he had tried to reinvent himself in London financial circles, but his reputation had followed him. Without the Hayes family connections to smooth his path, his limitations as a businessman had become increasingly apparent. And Hayes Investments? They were once the dominant force in Dallas business. How have they adapted to the changing landscape? "Richard Hayes retired 2 years ago," I noted. "The company has downsized significantly and refocused on traditional real estate development under new leadership. I believe they're stable, but no longer expanding." This, too, was an understatement. Hayes Investments had never recovered from the Hayes Meridian debacle. The regulatory investigations sparked by their aggressive tactics had revealed patterns of questionable practices stretching back decades. Several major investors had withdrawn, forcing the company to sell off assets and retreat to a fraction of its former size. After the journalist departed, Charlotte returned to my office with news about our newest initiative, a specialized neural interface designed specifically for children with communication disabilities. "The pediatric implementation team has integrated feedback from 17 countries," she reported enthusiastically. "The adaptability across different healthcare systems is remarkable. Under the old model, we would have designed for premium U.S. hospitals only. And the accessibility index? I asked, referring to our metric for measuring how widely a technology could be implemented across different economic environments. 87%, Charlotte replied proudly, meaning it can be effectively deployed in facilities serving 87% of the global pediatric population. That would have been unimaginable 5 years ago. That evening, I left the office earlier than usual to attend an event I had been anticipating for months, the official opening of the Neural Recovery Center at Dallas Memorial Hospital. This state-of-the-art rehabilitation facility would provide neural interface therapy to patients regardless of insurance status or financial resources, funded through a combination of foundation support and innovative payment models tied to recovery outcomes. The center represented everything we had fought for: technology that served human needs rather than corporate interests, accessible to those who needed it most. As I approached the hospital entrance, I was greeted by Dr. Vanessa Rodriguez, the neurologist who would be directing the center. "Emily! Perfect timing," she said warmly. "Some of our first patients are already here for orientation. Would you like to meet them before the formal ceremony?" Inside, the center hummed with purposeful activity. Medical staff prepared equipment, therapists consulted with patients and families, and technicians performed final calibrations on the neural interface systems. This wasn't the sterile corporate environment the Hayes Meridian model would have created, but a vibrant, human-centered space designed for healing and recovery. Dr. Rodriguez introduced me to several patients, including James Mitchell, a 42-year-old construction worker who had lost motor function after a spinal injury. "Mr. Mitchell will be among the first to use our enhanced motor recovery protocol," she explained. "I never thought something like this would be available to someone like me," James said, emotion evident in his voice. "My insurance wouldn't cover the costs under the old system. But now," he gestured to the interface equipment being prepared for his first session, "now I might get to walk my daughter down the aisle next year." These moments, connecting with the people whose lives were transformed by the technology, grounded me in purpose in a way that business metrics never could. These weren't abstract users or market segments, but individuals with hopes, dreams, and relationships that neural interface technology could help restore. The formal opening ceremony began at 6 p.m., with hospital administrators, medical staff, patients' families, and community representatives gathering in the center's main atrium. As the featured speaker, I would be expected to address the significance of this new facility within the broader context of medical technology accessibility. From my position near the podium, I scanned the audience, recognizing many faces from the neural interface community. To my surprise, I spotted Michael and Jennifer Hayes seated toward the back, their presence a reminder of the unexpected allies who had emerged during the darkest days of the Hayes Meridian battle. More surprising was the figure seated near the exit, Patricia Hayes, elegant as ever despite being well into her 70s now. Our eyes met briefly across the room, and she gave a slight nod of acknowledgement. Her attendance spoke volumes about her evolution since that night 5 years ago. When it was my turn to speak, I approached the podium with a sense of purpose that transcended the specific occasion. This center represented not just a facility for neural recovery, but a physical manifestation of a different approach to medical technology, one that prioritized impact over control, accessibility over exclusivity. 5 years ago, I began, neural interface technology stood at a crossroads. One path led toward increasingly sophisticated systems available to a select few, controlled by proprietary interests. The other path, the one we chose, led toward collaborative development focused on maximizing accessibility and impact. I shared the journey from that pivotal decision to the present moment, highlighting not the business challenges but the human stories that had emerged along the way. The veteran who regained independence after devastating injuries. The stroke survivor who reconnected with family through restored communication. The children with neurological conditions who gained new pathways for learning and interaction. This center embodies a fundamental truth we discovered through that journey. I continued. That the greatest value of technology lies not in its exclusivity, but in its accessibility. Not in how much revenue it generates per unit, but in how many lives it transforms. As I spoke, I noticed Patricia Hayes listening intently, her expression thoughtful. What thoughts were passing through her mind? Regret for the path her family had chosen? Recognition of what might have been possible had they embraced a different approach? Or perhaps simply acknowledgement that the world had changed in ways the Hayes dynasty had failed to anticipate. The patient who walks again after being told they never would. The grandparent who communicates with beloved family after losing speech to a stroke. The child who finds new pathways for learning despite neurological challenges. These aren't just success stories. They're reminders of why technology exists in the first place, to solve human problems and expand human possibilities. The applause that followed felt like affirmation not just of my words, but of the fundamental choice we had made 5 years earlier to prioritize impact over control, collaboration over domination, accessibility over exclusivity. After the ceremony, I navigated through well-wishers toward Michael and Jennifer, who greeted me warmly. "Remarkable achievement," Michael said, gesturing around the center. "Though I'm not entirely surprised my mother came. She's been following your work more closely than she'd admit." She sent me a note after the Geneva summit, I revealed. It suggested she understood more than I'd given her credit for. Jennifer nodded. Patricia was always more perceptive than Richard or David. She just spent decades sublimating that perception to family expectations. Since Richard's retirement, she's been different, more authentic. Before I could respond, I noticed Patricia, herself approaching, her composure impeccable as always. Michael tensed slightly beside me. Their relationship remained complicated despite the passage of time. "Emily," Patricia greeted me with surprising warmth. "This center is truly impressive. The scope of what you've accomplished in 5 years is extraordinary." "Thank you for coming," I replied, genuinely appreciative of the gesture it represented. "It means a lot to see you here." She glanced around at the facility, taking in the patients, the medical staff, the tangible manifestation of a vision so different from what her family had pursued. "I always understood your intelligence," she said quietly. "What I failed to appreciate was your vision. The Hayes approach to business. It had its era. But this," she gestured around the center, "this is the future." It was perhaps the most honest conversation we had ever had, an acknowledgement of how fundamentally different our values and perspectives had been, yet also recognition of what had been achieved through that difference. As Patricia moved away to speak with Dr. Rodriguez, Michael looked after her with a complex expression. 5 years ago, I wouldn't have believed this moment was possible, he admitted. The Hayes family acknowledge any path but their own as valid. People can change, I suggested. Not everyone, not completely, but sometimes enough to matter. Later that evening, after the crowds had dispersed and the center staff were preparing for the first full day of operations tomorrow, I found myself alone in the atrium. The space was quiet now, the equipment waiting to fulfill its purpose of healing and restoration. My phone chimed with a message from Charlotte. Final numbers confirmed for tomorrow's announcement. 1 million active interfaces, implementations. In 41 countries, estimated 62% of recipients would have had no access under the old model. Those statistics represented the tangible validation of the path we had chosen 5 years ago. Concrete evidence that the collaborative approach had expanded possibilities far beyond what the proprietary model could have achieved. As I prepared to leave, Dr. Rodriguez joined me for a final review of the center's readiness. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "I was at that medical conference when Hayes Meridian announced their premium approach to neural interface deployment. I remember thinking, well, that's it then. Another life-changing technology that most of my patients will never access." She gestured around the center, which would begin serving patients of all economic backgrounds the very next day. I never imagined this alternative was possible, that someone would choose a different path entirely. Her words stayed with me as I drove home through the Dallas evening. The choice we had made 5 years ago hadn't just been a business strategy. It had been a fundamental statement about values, about what matters most in the development and deployment of technology that can transform human lives. At home, I settled onto my balcony with a glass of wine, looking out over the city lights. Dallas had been the backdrop for both the painful confrontation that had changed everything and the transformative work that had followed. The Hayes Tower was still visible on the skyline, though it no longer seemed to dominate the view as it once had. 5 years ago, in a moment of crisis, I had discovered that what the Hayes family saw as their greatest strength, their control-focused approach to power, was actually their profound limitation. They could not imagine success defined in terms other than domination, acquisition, and exclusivity. Their worldview had been revealed as not just ethically questionable, but practically obsolete, incapable of addressing the complex challenges of modern medical technology development. Meanwhile, the collaborative, open approach they had dismissed as naive idealism had proven dramatically more effective at both advancing innovation and expanding access. My phone rang, a video call from Dr. Eleni Papadopoulos in Athens, whose pediatric neural interface program had become a model for implementation in resource-limited environments. "I just heard about tomorrow's millionth interface milestone," she said after we exchanged greetings. "I wanted to share something with you." She turned her camera toward a young girl, perhaps 8 years old, who was demonstrating remarkable dexterity with previously paralyzed hands. "This is Sophia," Eleni explained. 6 months ago, she couldn't move her fingers at all after a traumatic brain injury. Today, she's relearning the piano. Sophia smiled shyly at the camera before returning to her careful finger exercises. "Under the old model, this technology would never have reached our clinic," Eleni continued. "Now we've implemented it for 17 children just like Sophia, with more beginning therapy next month." After we ended the call, I sat in the quiet of the evening, reflecting on the journey from that confrontation in the glass pavilion to this moment. The Hayes family had tried to break me that night, to force my compliance through humiliation and violence, to demonstrate their power by destroying what I had built. Instead, they had inadvertently sparked a transformation that extended far beyond me personally, beyond Neurotech as a company, to the fundamental approach to medical technology development. The slap that was meant to enforce control had instead catalyzed creation. The moment intended to demonstrate power had revealed its opposite. The act meant to diminish had ultimately expanded possibilities beyond what anyone could have predicted. 1 million interfaces, I murmured to myself, thinking of Sophia and James Mitchell and countless others whose lives had been transformed. 1 million stories of restoration, reconnection, and renewed possibility that might never have existed under the proprietary, control-focused model the Hayes family had championed. 5 years ago, when my husband slapped me at our family gathering for refusing to sign over my company, he thought public humiliation would break me. What he could never have imagined was that the moment would instead break open a new way of thinking, not just for me, but for an entire field of medical technology development. In the greatest of ironies, the Hayes family's attempt to control and diminish had ultimately liberated and expanded. Their most aggressive act had catalyzed their most comprehensive defeat, not just a business failure, but the obsolescence of their entire approach to power and success. And that, ultimately, was the victory that mattered most. Not personal vindication or corporate dominance, but the creation of something genuinely transformative. 1 million interfaces, 1 million lives changed, and a fundamental shift in how medical technology could serve humanity, not through exclusive control, but through collaborative creation. As the Dallas night deepened around me, I raised my glass in a silent toast, not to defeat adversaries, but to the vindication of a vision, to the proof that there are indeed 2 forms of power in this world: the power to control and restrict, and the power to create and enable. And that when these two approaches collide, creation ultimately prevails over control, possibility over limitation, collaboration over domination. That was the true legacy of that pivotal night, a legacy that would continue to transform lives long after the Hayes name had faded from relevance. A legacy measured not in market share or personal wealth, but in lives restored, capabilities regained, and human potential expanded. 1 million interfaces today, countless possibilities tomorrow. All because of a moment that was meant to break, but instead broke through. The following morning, I arrived at Neurotech headquarters early to prepare for the day's events. We had planned a global broadcast to mark the millionth interface milestone, connecting implementation sites across 5 continents for a synchronized celebration. Teams in Dallas, Nairobi, Singapore, São Paulo, and Berlin would share patient stories and clinical outcomes, demonstrating the worldwide impact of the collaborative development model. As I reviewed the presentation materials in the conference room, Jackson Moore arrived with a stack of newspapers. Now in his 70s but still sharp as ever, Jackson had remained on Neurotech's board through all the transformations, his early support during the Hayes Meridian crisis earning him a permanent place in the company's history. "Thought you might want to see how the media is covering today's announcement," he said, spreading the publications across the table. The headlines told a story of transformation that extended far beyond neural interfaces. Neurotech's millionth interface milestone redefines medical technology development. Open collaborative model achieves in 5 years what experts predicted would take 20. From corporate battle to global revolution, how Reynolds changed medical innovation. Hayes to highways. Dallas entrepreneur's journey transforms healthcare access. The last one made me smile with its clever wordplay. Jackson pointed to a specific article in the Wall Street Journal, his expression thoughtful. "This one's particularly interesting. It's about how the Neurotech model is now being adapted for other medical technologies, cardiac monitoring systems, diabetes management platforms, even drug development pipelines." The article detailed how what had begun as a desperate pivot in response to the Hayes Meridian threat had evolved into a template being replicated across the medical technology landscape. Companies that had once fiercely guarded their intellectual property were now establishing collaborative development frameworks, recognizing that this approach accelerated innovation while expanding market reach beyond traditional premium segments. "When you made that initial proposal to the board," Jackson reminisced, "I supported it because I believed in you personally. I didn't fully grasp the paradigm shift it represented. None of us did." "I'm not sure I did either," I admitted. "I knew the collaborative approach could save Neurotech and preserve our technology's impact. I didn't anticipate it would transform the entire field of medical technology development." Our conversation was interrupted by Charlotte, who bustled in with several members of the technical team. "We've got a surprise addition to today's broadcast," she announced excitedly. The team at Makerere University Hospital in Uganda just completed their 100th pediatric implementation. They'll be joining the live stream. This was particularly meaningful news. Uganda had been among the first developing nations to adopt the Open Neural Interface Platform, adapting it specifically for pediatric patients affected by a range of neurological conditions. Their implementation model had since been replicated across several neighboring countries, expanding access in a region that would have been entirely excluded under the Hayes Meridian premium approach. As the headquarters filled with staff preparing for the global broadcast, I received an unexpected message from Michael Hayes. "Watching today's announcement with pride and admiration. What you've built matters. Father still doesn't understand, but many of us do." The message reinforced something I had observed over the past 5 years, that while Richard Hayes remained entrenched in his outdated understanding of business and power, many others from that world had evolved. Some, like Michael, had actively embraced new approaches. Others had at least recognized that the landscape had fundamentally changed. At 10 a.m., we gathered in the broadcast studio established in Neurotech's headquarters. The space featured multiple screens showing the teams in Nairobi, Singapore, São Paulo, and Berlin, all prepared for the synchronized announcement. The energy was palpable as countdown clocks ticked toward the moment when we would officially recognize the millionth active neural interface implementation. Dr. Parker Williams joined me at the central podium, his role in developing the alternative to the Campbell algorithm having been crucial to our independence from Hayes Meridian. "Never imagined we'd get here," he murmured, surveying the global teams visible on the screens. "Not this quickly, not this comprehensively." The broadcast began with a brief welcome from each location, highlighting the diversity of settings where neural interface technology was now being implemented, from sophisticated university hospitals to rural clinics, from specialized rehabilitation centers to community health facilities. When my turn came to speak, I shared not the corporate history of Neurotech, but the human story behind the milestone we were celebrating. 5 years ago, neural interface technology stood at a crossroads. The path we chose wasn't the easiest or the most immediately profitable. It was the path that placed human impact above market control, collaboration above competition, accessibility above exclusivity. As I spoke, the screens displayed a montage of patient stories from around the world, people whose lives had been transformed through neural interface therapy. The child in rural Kenya now communicates with family after years of silence. The elderly stroke survivor in Taiwan reconnects with grandchildren. The accident victim in Brazil regaining independence through restored motor function. Today's millionth interface represents not just a numerical milestone, but a validation of this fundamental choice, I continued. Under the traditional proprietary model, analysts projected that perhaps 200,000 patients would have accessed this technology by now, primarily those with premium insurance or personal wealth in developed economies. The screens shifted to display a global map showing implementation sites across 41 countries, spanning wealthy financial centers and remote rural regions, sophisticated medical complexes, and modest community clinics. Instead, 1 million people worldwide have benefited from neural interface therapy, with 62% of implementations occurring in settings that would have been excluded under the proprietary model. This isn't just a different scale of impact, it's a fundamentally different understanding of what technology should accomplish and how it should serve. The formal announcement continued with updates from each global location, highlighting innovations that had emerged through the collaborative approach, adaptations for specific patient populations, implementation models for resource-limited environments, training protocols for settings with fewer specialized personnel. What struck me most powerfully during these presentations was how the collaborative model had unleashed creativity and problem-solving that no single corporate entity could have generated. The Nairobi team had developed simplified calibration procedures for facilities with limited technical staff. Singapore researchers had created enhanced feedback mechanisms for pediatric patients. Brazilian implementers had pioneered community-based support systems for rural users. After the formal broadcast concluded, our teams worldwide transitioned to celebration events at their respective locations. In Dallas, we moved to the company atrium, where hundreds of Neurotech employees, local, medical partners, and patients who had benefited from neural interface therapy gathered for a community reception. The limitations of our original vision were part of the problem, I reflected. We were trapped in the same paradigm as the Hayes family, just positioned differently within it. We thought in terms of market share and competitive advantage, not collaborative potential. When did that shift for you? Amara asked curiously. When did you start seeing beyond the competition with Hayes Meridian to this larger vision? The question made me pause, searching for the precise moment when my understanding had fundamentally changed. It wasn't instantaneous, I admitted. But I think the seed was planted the night David slapped me. Not because of the violence itself, but because in that moment, I saw with perfect clarity the bankruptcy of the Hayes approach to power. As we continued our conversation, a notification appeared on my phone. An unexpected invitation to speak at next month's World Economic Forum about transformative business models in healthcare technology. 5 years ago, such a platform would have been unimaginable for me. My voice drowned out by established industry leaders like Richard Hayes and his peers. Now, the world is looking to Neurotech and our collaborative approach as a template for addressing complex challenges beyond neural interface technology. The transformation had expanded far beyond our original domain, influencing how leaders in multiple sectors thought about innovation, access, and the fundamental purpose of technology. Later that night, after returning to my apartment, I received a video message from Dr. Eleni Papadopoulos in Athens, showing a celebration at their implementation site. Their team had decorated their neural therapy room with balloons and a handmade sign that read, 1 million strong and just beginning. The video panned across patients and their families gathered for the celebration, their faces alight with the joy of restored capabilities and renewed possibilities. These were people who, under the Hayes Meridian model, would have been excluded from neural interface therapy entirely, their access denied not by medical limitations but by artificial barriers of price and profit. As I prepared for bed, my phone chimed with one final message of the day, an email notification that the Open Medical Technology Foundation had received major funding to extend the collaborative development model to 3 additional fields: prosthetics, diagnostic imaging, and drug delivery systems. The foundation, established 2 years earlier to formalize the collaborative approach, was now positioned to accelerate medical technology development across multiple domains. The email included a quote from the foundation's director. The neural interface transformation demonstrated that we don't have to choose between innovation and accessibility. The collaborative model accelerates technical advancement while simultaneously expanding who benefits. This is the future of ethical, effective medical technology development. Standing at my bedroom window, looking out at the Dallas skyline where the Hayes Tower stood diminished among newer, more innovative structures, I reflected on the philosophical dimension of what had transpired over the past 5 years. The confrontation with the Hayes family hadn't just been about business strategy or market position. It had been about fundamentally different understandings of power and value. The Hayes approach, controlling access, restricting information, dominating markets, had been revealed as not just ethically questionable, but practically inferior. The collaborative approach, sharing information, enabling contribution, expanding access, had proven dramatically more effective at both advancing technology and serving human needs. This wasn't just a victory for Neurotech or for me personally. It was validation of a different way of thinking about technology, business, and ultimately human progress. One defined not by who controls the most, but by who enables the most. Not by exclusivity, but by accessibility. Not by domination, but by collaboration. 5 years ago, when my husband slapped me at our family gathering for refusing to sign over my company, he thought public humiliation would break me. In that moment of violence, he had revealed the true nature of the Hayes approach to power: force rather than persuasion, control rather than creation, domination rather than contribution. What neither David nor Richard could have possibly imagined was that their attempted destruction would catalyze not just my personal determination, but a fundamental transformation in how medical technology could be developed and distributed. That the very act meant to assert control would ultimately unleash unprecedented collaborative creation. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to expand the impact of neural interface technology and extend the collaborative model to other domains. But tonight, I allowed myself to appreciate the milestone we had reached and the validation it represented, not just of a business strategy, but of a fundamentally different understanding of what constitutes true power and meaningful success. 1 million interfaces today, countless possibilities tomorrow, all because of a moment that was meant to break, but instead broke through to something far greater than anyone could have imagined. Looking for more? We've got two amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.